Really invite our next speaker. Carole Bettinson will provide her perspective on the patient journey and what it is like to be a caregiver for various family members with inflammatory bowel disease from childhood into adulthood. Carole started her journey as a caregiver in 1983 when her husband, Phil, was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, to be followed by their youngest son, Jeremy, being diagnosed in 1989, and then her eldest son, Taylor, in 2007. She has been a member of the Crohn's and Colitis community for more than 20 years. Carole is the past president of the Halton chapter and now currently serves as the vice president. She's been involved in the Halton Gutsy Walk for many years. As well, she is key in initiating this year's weekend Camp Got to Go in Ontario. She believes that a cure will be found in the near future. However, we must provide support in the interim for children and all sufferers living with this illness. Please join me in welcoming Carole.
This is kind of how I've identified my journey with my family with IBD. I look at it more of a medical hat trick as a hockey puck in a hockey game as opposed to a magic wand coming out of a hat, but that's how you see it. When I was asked to say a few words from the perspective of a caregiver of family members with IBD, my first reaction was absolute panic and absolutely no way. Just the thought of opening all those painful memories scared me, and I certainly did not want to share my journey with a room full of strangers. Then, after many serious moments of reflection, I knew I had to speak as a caregiver. I felt I had to validate this incredibly difficult journey of any mother, father, sister, brother, or friend that has supported someone with this illness. My journey is simply that. It is certainly not any less or any more than another caregiver's situation. Early on as a caregiver, I quickly discovered that IBD was not a tasteful disease to speak about. Much like mental illness, IBD had a certain stigma attached to it, as quite frankly, it was associated with poop. Thank goodness, this illness has now, many years later, gained media exposure, and improved education has lessened the stigma. In 1983, my journey as a caregiver was about to begin. With 2 small children and both working parents, it was a busy household. My husband suddenly started to lose a lot of weight, 28 pounds in 1 month. We thought it best for him to check in with our GP, who then, after some time, sent him to a GI specialist who diagnosed him with ulcerative colitis. Never having heard of this illness before, I remembered my husband stating, "I have an incurable disease." I responded, "Is it cancer?" He confirmed that it wasn't, so we celebrated that it wasn't cancer and moved on with our lives. There was never any mention of dietary restrictions, probiotics, prebiotics, stress in the gut, no answers as to why he had this disease. As no one else in my husband's family or mine had this illness, and without access to any internet at the time, we kept his illness a secret and continued to the best of our abilities in raising our family. My husband continued to have times of what they called flare-ups. Other than increasing his meds, there was not much else that we could do. I was so angry that I could not help him in any way to alleviate his numerous bathroom trips and bouts of severe abdominal pain. Little did I know the stage was being set for what was to occur in the future. In the summer of 1989, our youngest son, who was 9 years old, came home from camp and told us he was having stomach aches, diarrhea, and some dark stuff in his BM. We did what any parent would do, took him to our family doctor, who did the routine blood and stool test. The results were all negative. They ruled out bacterial infections, and yet the symptoms continued. Then the canker sores and aches in his knees began. My anxiety and frustration levels were increasing. As any parent who has a sick child, I wanted the diagnosis and the cure yesterday. We decided that we were not prepared to wait for any additional tests and requested, no, I actually demanded a referral to the GI team at Sick Kids. This was, as I recall, the initial journey of what we now know as the mother line. Initially, the Sick Kids GI team were somewhat perplexed and I believe annoyed that we felt our son required their medical attention. After all, his tests were negative and he had only occasional diarrhea. We followed our instincts and a sigmoid with biopsies was agreed upon. While I was relieved the sigmoid would be done, I could not understand why I was required to be present for the biopsies and to hold them down while the biopsy was being completed. And I was told by the team they could not understand why my son was so upset, as no pain in the part of the body. He was 9 years old at the time. To me, this procedure seemed rather barbaric. However, this was Sick Kids, a world-class hospital, and who was I to challenge them? At that time, the sigmoid was negative. My anxiety levels were now out of control. Our young son still had symptoms of diarrhea and extreme pain. Once again, we persevered. We contacted the GI team and insisted they perform a colonoscopy on our son. Initially, we were brushed off and advised if they did perform a colonoscopy on our son, Initially, we were brushed off and advised that if they did perform a colonoscopy, there would be less than a 5% chance our son would have any issues. The sigmoid was clear, therefore the colonoscopy would probably be the same. I remember screaming at the doctor to complete the colonoscopy as his father had UC, and what if it was hereditary? The doctor did not agree with my UC diagnosis, but he did reluctantly agree to perform the colonoscopy. Well, as our luck should have it, we did not win the lottery, and the less than 5% chance of our son having IBD was confirmed he 100% did. From that point, our lives became a roller coaster ride of emotion, tears, fear, and anger. Anger that our young son's life would forever be changed, mourning a loss of innocence for a child, my child. The tears, I can't remember crying so much. For as his mother, I couldn't fix this in fear of what the future held in store for him. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that he now has to take a handful of pills every day of his life to alleviate the excruciating pain and nausea that he had? In addition, I witnessed the guilt that my husband now carried, and that somehow he had passed on this illness to our son. All logic seemed to disappear from our lives, just trying to cope with this new challenge as a family. Our son, as any child with IBD, went through some times of good health and then flares. Along with the roller coaster that accompanies any illness, the anxiety levels of our son also increased. In addition, the schooling system at that time clearly had no comprehension of what he was dealing with, and the disconnect from his studies began. After much thought, we made the decision to place him into an independent school, which did alleviate the lack of compassion that he required while learning. Our war with the public school system had now ended, but the depression levels increased in our young son. Back in the 1980s, an IBD child was not treated on a holistic basis. So once again, we sought out psychologists, social workers, anyone who would help our son to accept his limitations, if any, with his illness. Finally, we did seek out an excellent child psychiatrist who we believe had the compassion and understanding to alleviate his dislike of his body, and over time, he no longer identified himself as a disease. I would like to mention that after our initial orientation at Sick Kids and some heated debates with the medical team, once identified as having IBD, the treatment and our relationship with the medical team was very positive and very reliable. As the years progressed, at the age of 18, we once again had to find a new GI specialist. There was no intermediary locating an adult GI specialist at that time. Unfortunately, once again, we encountered another bad experience with a doctor who directly advised our son that we'd have cancer by the time he was 30. My husband, who attended that particular appointment, digressed, and with some expletives to that particular doctor, fired him on the spot, and we once again were on a mission to locate the best care we could in the city for our son. Luckily, we did discover, after many weeks of searching, a wonderful doctor, Dr. Gigi Boy, who corrected the last diagnosis of the previous doctor to our son and ourselves, and also shed some well-needed humor into the entire situation. He was exactly what our son and any caregiver required, hope. At this point in time, I felt that our son was now receiving the medical care and relationship he so needed, and stepped back to catch my breath to notice we had another child whose emotional needs had been somewhat overlooked. Again, another hazard as a caregiver. While providing the best care and obtaining as much knowledge as one can possibly find for the sick child, other children in your home also require your valuable time. Feeling somewhat overwhelmed with this situation, I sought counseling for myself. From the counseling, I understood that my husband and son's illness was a family illness, affecting not only myself, but our eldest son as well. The years passed, our youngest son did complete post-secondary education, but not without continuous health issues, both physically and mentally. The mental health issues connected to an adolescent and this illness are never to be underrated. We provided as parents the best emotional support that was possible, both within and outside the family unit. I cannot emphasize how important it is to address the emotional side of this disease. You must advocate for your children and loved ones. Just when I felt that our lives were settling, our eldest son, without a word to anyone, was also suffering some gut issues. Upon returning from a trip to a southern destination, he was experiencing some unusual symptoms, and eventually he too was confirmed to have IBD. Coincidentally, at the same age as my husband, 28 years of age. His journey has also been difficult. I believe, having witnessed his dad's and his brother's journey over the years, he attempted to underestimate his illness so as not to add to this emotional journey for his family that he witnessed and was a part of for many years as a child. He too is now in the process of accepting his illness. At this point, the emotional roller coaster began yet again. My anger and emotional heartache was out of control. Who has every family member they love diagnosed with the same illness? Frankly, I did. It was so unbelievable. For some time, I could not or would not accept that both of our children and my husband now had this illness. My poor husband was both physically and emotionally drained, as once again the thought he now had given not only one but both of our children this horrible disease resurfaced. For many years, I tried to hide my tears and anxiety. And yet again, I felt hopeless that as a wife and mother, I could not change the outcome. But as any caregiver knows, the darkness comes, somehow you survive it, and you move on with the hope there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I have luckily inherited a sense of humor that has in many cases lightened the moment and allowed me to take the next step forward. As many of my IBD family know, our dog was also diagnosed with colitis, has had a resection, and now takes prednisone twice a day. He too is thriving. A moment of irony or humor, I guess it depends on how one wants to look at it. As difficult as it has been to speak of this part of my life, the weight of being a caregiver has somewhat lightened. My wonderful husband told me many years ago that he is going to fight this illness as best he can with efforts towards a healthy lifestyle, to give our sons hope that a somewhat normal life is a possibility. So far, he has done just that. Our sons are now fully grown, huge men, both over 6'4", so this disease in their case did not rob them of their growth. Secondly, they, in spite of their illness, did obtain a post-secondary education, participated in sports, in some cases on a varsity level, dated, partied way too much, and are now both married with children, great wives, and good jobs. At one of our sons' weddings, I spoke to the newly married couple, and at one point said to our new daughter-in-law, "I'm now passing the ball over to you regarding our son's health and recent hospitalization and recovery." That was unbelievably therapeutic for me as a mother, knowing that someone else now cared as much, perhaps more than I, regarding our son's health issues. We now have 5 healthy grandchildren, all under 5. Do I worry they too perhaps might be affected with this disease one day? I would be lying if I said I wasn't. What I have learned from all of this is that although I did and still do worry about my children and husband's health, I have the emotional tools and logic to live for today and not worry about tomorrow. There were times I never would have believed my husband and children would have soldiered on as well as they have. They are my strength, my joy, and my hope that life has now returned, although with bumps, some bumps, to a new normal. And that is all anyone can expect from life. On that note, I wish all caregivers a sense of humor to lighten your load, logic to allow you to follow the course, and most of all, hope. Your loved ones will have their struggles, but you can and will survive this journey.